our LinkedIn Live program with Peri Shawn. She is the author of Sell More with Sales Coaching. I'm Gerhard Schwartner, and I'm also the host of the Sales 3.0 conference. We have a CEO summit, and Peri is going to do a keynote. So let's do a little bit of a preview. What can people expect when you walk on stage in Vegas?
Well, let's see. A little bit of neuroscience and then what actually happens in a prospect's brain when they make the decision to buy. And we're actually going to test the research, not just take it at face value, but to actually test it. And then we're going to look at what do you actually look at with your team in order to integrate that research, and what kind of difference that makes to the conversations that they're having. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about an AI project that we're working on where we're integrating the neuroscience of selling with AI.
Wow, it sounds fascinating. So what have you learned about neuroscience, how it affects the salesperson's brain and how it affects the customer's brain?
Oh, yeah, that's a big question. How long do we have? I'm teasing. Short version is part of what's going on inside the brain. We have the emotional centers of our brain and we have the executive center. And the team member who's the seller they're actually like the GPS to the conversation with the questions that they ask. And the prospect is the one who is basically in the driver's seat. But the thing to remember, based on the neuroscience, is that in the back seat, we have, two kids sitting in the back seat for the prospect, and for your team member, you have two of their kids sitting in the back seat. And when I say kids, those of us either, if we don't have kids, we remember being a kid in the back seat of a car and how challenging that is sometimes for the parents. Or if we are a parent, we know what it's like to have kids in the back seat. And when I say kids in the back seat, that's the emotional centers of our brain. The research shows that we do buy an emotion justified by logic. Most people are aware of that. But the part that many people aren't aware of is that we don't have just one emotion. We actually have two emotions at the same time. And so therefore, the sales team, when they're selling, one, it's about how do they quiet their own guys in the back seat so that they can really be present to the prospect. That's one. But two is how do they navigate the sales conversation in a way that they're engaging both emotions, not just one.
So one of the kids in the back seat is the inner critic that makes commentary while a conversation is going on. I'd be curious to know, how do you silence that inner critic?
Great question. So part of it, maybe I'll give an example of myself going up for a sales meeting. This was very early. This was my first meeting, and with a senior exec in a large corporation, largest bank in Canada. And I did work to, bring my mind to balance and going for the meeting. And just to give you some context, my first career in life, I was a high school teacher. So I was going from being a high school teacher to working with executives because of the research I was doing there, got great results. In 6 weeks, 1 day a week, they doubled their sales. And that's the reason why I was doing this. So I was going to meet with the senior VP of sales. And as I went to press the button, all of a sudden I realized my heart was racing and my palms were beginning to get sweaty. And I'm like, no, I missed something in making sure that I was silencing that inner critic. And so when I got in the elevator, I heard myself saying to myself, who am I to be doing this?
Wow.
And I'm like, oh, great. Thank you. But that this is the reality of where I am. And this is the reality of where many salespeople are too. And one thing I learned from one of my mentors early on was sometimes the questions we ask ourselves, we ask with the wrong intonation.
Interesting.
And so in that moment, I went, okay, remembering his words, I went, all right, not who am I to be doing this, but who am I to be doing this? And so thank goodness the senior executive was on the top floor of the building, and it was a tall building. So as I'm in the elevator going up, in my mind, I'm going, okay, why am I the perfect match for this? Why me? And I'm going through my skill sets in my mind about why me for this specific situation. And when I did, by the time I got out of the elevator, I'm so grateful it was a long ride. My mind was fine. My heart was no longer racing, and my hands were no longer, clammy. And that taught me an important lesson in that moment, is that we are responsible for what's going on inside of our mind. And what I realized also in that moment was that the client wanted to work with me because of those strengths, but my strengths were her weaknesses. And so therefore, because she was really good with numbers, et cetera, that it got her to where she is, and that she needed more skill set around, helping the team grow and develop even more. And so therefore, we were a great match. And so for me, that was a real important lesson. And I think when salespeople go to their meeting is about really being present to what's going on in your mind. And if you're not, your body will let you know, which is a nice thing. It's almost like the body is the voice for your mind if you're not listening to it.
I think that is a wonderful story. And what went through my mind as you were talking was the power of self-acceptance, because you ask yourself the question, who am I to be talking to this person? And behind that question is really, am I going to be accepted? And is my presentation going to be acceptable? And it's so critical to have practiced self-acceptance and become aware that those questions that you ask are directed by somebody in the back seat.
Yes, exactly. And so to become more aware of that, and part of the dynamic for the salesperson with the prospect is that their questions, lead the conversation. And I'm not saying leading questions, but that they're being present to what's going on for them. And as they ask those questions, the prospect becomes more and more emotionally engaged. And as they become more and more emotionally engaged, if they're hitting both emotions that they're experiencing at the same time, the results tend to be higher as a byproduct. They sell more.
Give me an example of two emotions that the customer may experience.
Okay. Well, actually, I'll give you an example that probably everybody can relate to, no matter who they are. Like, for example, if you think about an opportunity that you're really excited about. Okay. Yeah. You got one in your mind?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, great. In that same experience, there's another emotion.
Yep.
What's the other emotion? The other emotion is usually nervousness or...
it may lead to nothing. I may invest a lot of time in creating that deal and sending emails and creating value statement and do some research, and it may end up in nothing. It may evaporate.
Yes. Great. And so to be aware that there's those two things happening at the same time. So for a prospect, there's usually something that's driving them. And I usually find it's often personal and professional, because often we only focus on the professional, but there's also a personal win in there for them that's, motivating them, whatever that might be. It might be certain results or whatever. And then the other is all the challenges that they've had trying to get there. And so part of it is to inquire about those things in a strategic way, so that you're actually engaging them emotionally before you start talking about what it is that you have to offer.
Right.
Because they're on the call with you or on Zoom, whatever, because you've already provided something that's got their interest.
Right.
And
I,
also, go ahead.
yeah, I want to reconnect with you what you said earlier when you changed the tone of voice of your self-talk in the elevator. Is there something about the tone of voice that you can pick up from the customer side that you can then respond to and resonate better?
Great question. Yes, I mean, part of it is um, as a sales team member, when you're listening to a prospect, you're listening for where there's emotion, and where there's emotion is, I mean, all of us know when we're speaking to a friend. What do we do with a friend? We'll go, "Oh, tell me more about that," or "What's
Right.
going on?" or whatever. And not to turn that off when you're with prospects. The same thing exists inside of a conversation with a prospect or
Right.
a client. And to me, uh, part of that skill that we have outside is something that we bring to the dynamic, because we're all human and we all want to have
Yeah.
that connection. Yeah.
It's fascinating to me because uh, you remind me that we all have that prefrontal cortex, the inner CEO, the executive function of the brain that we
Yes.
engage in pursuit of goals. But
Hmm.
on the way to goals, we encounter obstacles and we encounter the emotions that are triggered by the back seat.
Yes.
And becoming aware, am I moving in the direction of my goal? And becoming aware, what are the things that push me forward and what are the things that hold me back?
Hmm.
And that is a big discovery for salespeople, that they're not often aware. And in the heat of the battle, they say the wrong thing or don't listen to the right thing.
Yes. And their listening is triggered by the questions they ask, which is, if sometimes I hear salespeople saying, "Oh, well, our prospects are just not giving us the information that we need, and so that's the problem, is the prospect." And it's like, well, let's look at it. What are you actually asking them? Because it's the questions that you're asking that drive the conversation dynamically. And the other is too, I so often I get called in and to find out what's going on. Close ratios changed, or something's shifted, and and they think it's the ending part of the conversation that's the problem. But the reality is, it's the beginning part of the conversation that's the problem. The part where you're asking the questions, they try to get to offering their product, in the first what one what 1/10 of the conversation, which is like, you haven't got them emotionally engaged yet. So no wonder you talking about your product isn't working. And the other important part is the trust element in all of this, is what degree of trust have they earned from the prospect or client in the conversation? Because the more trust they've earned, the more the prospect or client will tell them.
Yeah.
And you know, and that to me has been a very interesting world to look at. I've been doing trust research for many years. I'm showing my age, more than 30 years. And every single time I do the research, no matter what level a person is in an organization, no matter what industry, 90 percentile every single time is one particular behavior. And that is, listen to me. And if we know that listening is going to build the trust, then and build the relationship so they'll tell you more, why are we doing as much talking as many salespeople do? I mean, even the hiring of salespeople, we actually engage them. Most organizations structure the sales interview by having a great list of questions and then getting the salesperson to talk. But that's not the skill that's going to get them the best results. The talking part, what we've discovered is if a salesperson speaks, because we've had the opportunity to work with large sales teams of 700, it's the max that we've had. We've been able to track, make one change, see what happens to the results within an hour. And we've tested different things in different ways. And the thing that we've discovered over and over and over again is when a sales team member speaks more than 4 sentences at a time about what they do, what they sell, the sales results go down.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And so it's not about the talking. It's about when we do speak, it's about making sure that those 4 sentences are, tight and concise, etc. But it's not about being verbose. It's about being able to ask excellent questions.
And I think the same applies when a manager coaches a salesperson.
Yes.
In order to help a salesperson grow to a higher level of potential, the sales manager needs to be able to listen to that person so that they can express themselves fully, frankly, and freely.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. And the natural tendency, as you are probably well aware, because I listen to a lot of conversations between a sales coach internally and a team member, the natural tendency is to give them the answer.
Right.
And the reality is, the way our brains are wired, if these are 2 neurons in our brain, actually the research of Jeffrey Schwartz from the United States, what he says, and his research shows, is that as you ask questions, you actually build a neural network.
Wow.
In someone's brain. Yeah. And so how many times have we said the same thing to somebody and they haven't retained it? Yet if we flip it and ask a question, we are building that neural network. We can only perform according to the neural network that we have. And so therefore it makes sense that we stay in the question most of the time with team members.
That is fascinating because you and I have a similar background. I was training salespeople, and in the beginning, I exhausted myself teaching people. And I thought, why am I so tired at the end of the day? And the next day, I turned it around and asked salespeople to teach me what makes a more effective salesperson in every phase of the sales call. And I did very little teaching and more listening, and they were more actively engaged and they had a better time.
Yeah, totally with you. And to me, it's about that. And I find active listening implies that there's an agenda. To me, it's about authentic listening, so that you're actually listening to what it is that the client or prospect is, what are they emotionally engaged in? Because that's where you're going to be able to match and sell your product. And so it's an interesting aspect of, listening is an easy thing to say, but it's not necessarily an easy thing to do. And I'd also say it's a feeling. It's a feeling on the part of the prospect or client.
Wow.
Yeah.
And authentic listening is also AI, authentic listening, which is more magical than technological AI.
Yes.
Because essentially, at the core of all good selling are good questions.
Yes.
And with AI, the quality of your questions with ChatGPT determines the excellence of the answer. And it's the same with having the customer explain himself or herself because they want to be understood.
Yes.
If you ask good questions, you are in the driver's seat. And that brings me to Werner Heisenberg, the physicist who says, nature does not reveal its secrets. It only responds to a method of questioning.
Yes. Love that.
Well, I can't wait to see you on stage in Las Vegas. I could go on for hours listening to you because you have so much. There's so much to be learned from you, and you're really a wonderful teacher. And I can't wait to see the audience engage with you and learn from your insights on how to create a sales organization that performs at a higher level where they feel in the driver's seat and have a cheering section in the back seat.
There we go. I love it. And I'm really looking forward to being there and seeing you once again.
Thank you, Peri.
Thank you.